Bible stories have always been Peggy's favorite stories, so tonight she explores this wonderful in the beginning story of Adam and Eve from a psychological perspective. Please join me in welcoming Peggy Voth.
I say thank you to all of you for coming. I have very much enjoyed preparing this lecture, and I'm really happy to have somebody here to receive it. I look forward to doing this with you. Once upon a time, in a garden named Eden, there walked a woman who had no shame or self-doubt or fear. She shared this place of mist and fruit and birdsong with a man who knew no anger, no worry, no anxiety. Every evening, a big burly presence joined them for chit-chat and laughter. Usually this presence felt generous and loving, but sometimes it was moody, and sometimes it issued rules and ultimatums. Yet still, there was no alienation or loneliness. That's just how things were. Fun, love, closeness, rumblings about rules, especially about a certain tree in the garden. One day, in the middle of the day, in the middle of its usual playfulness, the woman ran to the apple tree, calling to Adam, "How many apples are on the tree today?" A serpent of substance curled its body around a branch of the tree and lowered its head so that it looked the woman in the eye. "Don't just count the apples," it said. "Taste one." "Oh, I can't do that," said the woman. But before the words were out of her mouth, she realized that tasting might be what those apples were for. She reached up, closed her hand around the firm shape, and tugged. The apple was in her hand, and she took a bite. Sweet, crisp, juicy. "Adam," she called, "there's one less apple on the tree. Come taste it." He looked at her, looked at the red apple with a white scoop in it. "Try it," the woman said. "It's really good. Not like anything we've tasted." Between the two of them, they ate it, core and all. Well, all was well until evening, when things did not feel like they usually did. "Uh-oh," the couple whispered to each other. "We weren't supposed to." And the presence thundered, "Have you done what we agreed you would not do?" The woman thought, "I don't think we agreed." Adam said, "The woman you made tempted me." The woman said, "The serpent deceived me." Yet inside herself, she knew that she chose to taste the apple. The serpent raised his head and looked eye to eye with the presence. The presence roared, "I punish you, serpent. I punish you, Adam. I punish you, woman. Out of my garden, out of my sight, now." The presence withdrew, taking the mist with it. An apple fell from the tree, making a little thud on the ground. Birdsong ceased. Adam took the woman's hand. She turned to face him. Their hearts were pounding. "I name you Eve," Adam said. "I name you Eve, for you are the mother, the genesis of all that lives." Tonight's lecture will unpack this story of a sleepy existence rattled by unconscious forces and unseemly choices. The biblical story has been presented as portraying the beginning of sin. The tale also reveals a path to increased consciousness and the rewards accompanying such a passage. In the Garden of Eden story, we have 4 participants: the Creator, Adam the first human, Eve the second human, and the serpent. In this lecture, I followed the orientation of the Gnostics, who read the scriptures through a psychodynamic lens. Using this perspective, the story centers around the interaction between the spiritual element of human nature, or Adam, and the psyche, which is made up of emotional and instinctual impulses, the psyche, or Eve. To the Gnostics, Eve represented the source of spiritual awakening. We have been told that we were born into sin, but really, we were born into the Garden of Eden, in that unconsciousness was our first state. As infants, we floated in a bliss of unawareness. Instinct prompted us to cry when hungry or uncomfortable. As children, we laughed and played in the mists of time. As adolescents, we began plucking apples. Even in adulthood, we move in an environment of relative self-ignorance. Early in life, all of us unconsciously agree to fill certain roles, to abide by certain rules, to adopt certain beliefs. Some of us become the angry child, or the clown, or the invisible one in the family. We go to school, put in our time at whatever activities our parents have signed us up for. Eventually, we move into the world to get married, to work, to make friends and a home. We believe that the goal of life is happiness, and we buy into various ways of finding that happiness. Consenting to these things while in a comatose state allows us to walk and talk and work and live within the expectations of those around us, our families, our workplaces, our society. We take on friendships, marriage, careers, and in order to get these relationships off the ground, we enter into unspoken, unverbalized, unwritten agreements, such as, "Yeah, I'll be nice enough to relax my boundaries because I want you as my friend. It's okay if you walk all over me." Or, "I'll lead, you follow." Or, "I need someone to rescue and you look like you need to be rescued, so let's get married." Or from the get-go, wanting to impress the boss whose goodwill is critical to our career, we overwork to show ourselves as keeners, even when we're sleep-deprived and starting to drink or eat or spend too much. Do you see the ways in which we walk in the midst of the garden? Unconsciousness was our original condition, and it continues to draw us back to itself. Yet there are points in life where there comes the serpent, and the apple, and the boot out of the garden, and if we're as lucky as Eve was, new meaning. So, let's look at the process of waking up to ourselves and to our lives and to our relationships. Here's the formula for tonight's consideration for waking up. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and out of the third comes the one as the fourth. In the beginning, Adam and Eve are merged with their Creator. They exist in the happiness of undifferentiation. There is no awareness of being different from or separate from the divine. There is no line between human and divine. Then comes one, the serpent. Eve gets a hint, a suggestion, a niggle, that all is not as it appears. There is something more going on. There is something more to be had. By listening to this hunch, the apple is plucked and tasted. One becomes two, divine and human. The oneness begins to separate into two. By evening, the presence is now experienced by the human couple as separate from themselves, different from themselves, and the presence has the power. Two becomes three. There's tension. Where there are two differing elements, tension arises. Once tension happens, it tends to build. First, Adam and Eve hide from the presence. They separate themselves from the presence even more by blaming. The presence then contributes to the separation by pronouncing judgment and withdrawing. The experience of separation then becomes internalized, and the humans begin to feel anxiety, guilt, alienation. Out of the third comes the one as the fourth. There's an aha moment. Now there is a vague stirring within Adam. A tiny light appears in the black stretch of his unconscious, and he begins to comprehend Eve's act. In response, he gives her a name that carries the meaning of what has just happened. You are the mother of all that lives. This recognition and naming releases within Adam and within the human couple the libido or psychological energy that is necessary for establishing a fruitful life outside the garden. That was the fourth step in coming to greater consciousness, the insight and the response to it. Out of the third comes the one as the fourth. New consciousness brings new joy. The new one returns Adam and Eve to a relative state of bliss. They now have access to an expanded sense of themselves and their abilities. Before them lies a new world for them to discover and master, and they have the energy and enthusiasm for doing that. This four-step process is very important, and if we can understand it, I believe we can better tolerate the discomfort of it as new levels of consciousness attempt to emerge in us. Therefore, I'm going to go over this process 2 more times. Right now, I'm going to take the alchemical equation step by step and try to give an overview in everyday language of how it looks in everyday life. Later on, after the break, I will go over it again using a set of drawings that Anna Nelson made as she struggled through a particular issue going on for her at that time. Here's where the process begins. Our life seems to be fine, or even great. We walk and talk and laugh and don't question too much. We fall in love, or think we do. We plan a wedding, the easy part of marriage. We treat ourselves to a honeymoon. Sex is great, or at least pretty good. By the end of the first year or so, We've got our unspoken agreements in place. We've settled in with the bird song and the tree that we are not to touch. Things are close to divine. We can do this marriage, or this friendship, or this job. There is no impetus to look deeper. Then comes the one, the serpent. The serpent is a symbol of the life force, of instinct, which rises from the depths of the psyche. It is far from consciousness, and it arouses either deep fascination or an instinctual move to keep our distance. Jung called it the representative of the world of instinct. He also said, whenever a snake appears, you must think of a primordial feeling of fear. The snake is the instinctive tendency. The serpent shows the way to hidden things and expresses inner impulses that lead man to go beyond the point of safety, beyond the limits of consciousness. The Gnostics saw the serpent as a teacher of divine wisdom. It comes to us when further self-distinction is needed. The way most of us experience this first stage of personal awakening is like this. Something insinuates itself into our awareness. Something begins to niggle at us. At some level, we have the sense that something is not quite right. Often it's subtle. Often we dismiss the vague discomfort and try to merrily go on our way. And this is how we do that, or how we can know that we're doing it. When we're saying yes when we should say no. Telling a white lie because we don't want to upset the apple cart. Continue giving too much even though we're starting to feel resentful. So the niggle gets stronger. The serpent moves down the tree. It becomes clear that the friendship or marriage or career is not working like it used to. If we still don't listen, the serpent looks us in the eye. We have disturbing dreams, or our health begins to break down. That's the one in the equation, the serpent, the niggle, the hunch that there might be a problem. One becomes two. Things begin to separate out. Something that didn't bother us before now bothers us. Adam and Eve became aware of their nakedness and were uncomfortable. The garden had not changed. The presence had not changed. Yet everything felt disturbed. The same happens for us. What once went unnoticed now inserts itself into our awareness. We become uncomfortable in the very relationship or friendship or workplace that we entered with anticipation. Two becomes three. We become aware of two stances toward the problem. These positions oppose each other and they cause tension. We know that something has to change, but what and how? To complicate things further, underneath our conscious options lies an unconscious position as well. This unconscious position may have started the trouble in the first place. It may well have triggered the niggle that told us something is amiss. It is trying to harmonize our entire being, our body and our mind and our soul, our inner world with our outer world. The niggle that started everything was uncomfortable. The awareness that came with the bite of new recognition was very uncomfortable. The tension in stage 3 is terribly uncomfortable. In fact, it often becomes unbearable. The third stage is very difficult, yet it is also very important. The first two stages happen to us The third stage is one of transition, and it requires our participation. Our responsibility in this stage of angst and unclarity is to wait, to curb our impulsive reactions without committing ourselves to either of our conscious positions. Often the question is, do I stay or do I leave? Do you feel the tension in that question? Do I stay or do I leave? There's big opposites and there's tension. What this third stage attempts to do is birth a more complete awareness of ourselves within the context of the situation that is no longer tolerable to us. That's why the ego has to wait and endure and suffer the angst of not knowing the next step. Suffer the angst of not forcing something to happen. By choosing to stop and wait, by choosing to not act impulsively, we make space for a third way, a different way to appear. And out of the third comes the one as the fourth. The fourth step is the aha. And when it comes, it typically takes something from each of the opposites. In other words, it uses some aspect of the staying position and some aspect of the leaving position and brings them together into a new path. The way opens before us and we feel released into life. The aha ushers in the fourth stage, a time of integrating the insight into daily life. Insights need to be acted on, anchored in some way so that they don't fly back out the window. Adam gave woman a new name, thereby sealing his new attitude that was a result of the insight. And out of the third comes the one as the fourth. What does that mean? The new one is a state of basking in our new awareness. Our consciousness has been enlarged, and we understand more about ourselves than we did before. Although life is no easier, there is an ease to living. We feel bigger, more clear, more present. Possibilities seem more possible. We taste again that oneness with ourselves and with life that we knew as infants. There is again the bird song and the enveloping warmth of the garden. The fourth stage is wonderful. It takes us to the new one, which sets us up to return to the first stage, where there's again a niggle that something's not quite right. Where there is again fruit to be plucked and tasted. For, like the infant that we were, there is still much that we do not know, much that we are not aware of. We feel on top of the world, yet the reality is that we are standing on top of an ocean of unconsciousness. Soon the niggle visits us again and the process starts over. This goes on throughout our lives. As we become skilled at listening to the niggle and at holding the tension of not knowing, the process speeds up. We have less time in the paradise of new awareness, but we return to that paradise quicker because we listen better to the niggle. The tension resolves itself sooner into a new aha. Round and round we go, all through life. We reach the breakthrough stage only if we progress through all the steps. Sometimes we do things that stop the process. We do these things because we can't hold the tension or because we refuse to listen to the niggle in the first place. One of the most common things we do that keeps us unconscious is the same thing that Adam and Eve did. The presence came for the usual evening walk and could not find its human companions. It intuited right away what had happened and asked, "Did you eat of the forbidden tree?" And what did Adam and Eve do? They blamed. Adam blamed the presence, and he blamed his woman. He said, "The woman you made for me gave it to me." Eve blamed the serpent. Basically, she said, "The devil made me do it." We humans are great at blaming. Out of that tendency of ours has come a simple wisdom that says, when you point your finger at someone else, 3 fingers are pointing back at you. If we follow the instruction implied in that statement, we examine ourselves 3 times before blaming or accusing someone else. I think one of the most disagreeable things to allow into awareness is the unconscious agreements that we have made with life or with other people. Adam and Eve entered into implicit agreements with the presence. They would be available to walk and talk with it every evening. They would not question. When the presence pointed out the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and said they must not eat its fruit, they didn't ask why. They didn't protest or push back. They were silent. And unconscious though it was, an agreement was struck. Adam was totally unconscious when he allowed the presence to take a rib from his side and make a creature who would thereafter ensnare his heart and rib him into more civilized behavior. Eve, in turn, said nothing when Adam named her woman, for she is made of man. She was unconscious. Generic, impersonal naming creates distance between the namer and the named. The term woman allowed Adam to see Eve as an extension of himself, without experiences and needs of her own. That impersonal term also hindered Eve from perceiving herself as unique from the namer, from Adam. All kinds of unconsciousness was going on in paradise that is still with us today. Here is a rather common scenario in the modern garden of romance. While dating, one person does something like showing up quite late, or doesn't phone when promised, or makes a joke that hurts. And the other person doesn't call him or her on it. Though there are misgivings, dating advances to something a little more serious, and now the two are exclusive. They're seen around town as a couple. Then one moves in with the other. A few years down the road, patterns have developed out of those first few times of ignoring his behavior. At some point, the one who let the behavior go without saying anything can no longer tolerate it. The person can see the negative effects of it on him or herself. It's easy then to stew about it and to believe that if that behavior just changed, the relationship would be so much better. If that thinking becomes a pattern, a gridlock will probably occur. Usually, we don't examine these agreements until our world starts rocking in a nasty way. Sometimes this shakes us awake. It took the dark wrath of the presence for Adam and Eve to finally stand on their own and begin to discover their potential and destiny. However waking up happens, it throws us into an uncomfortable place. Waking up changes a lot of things. What those changes look like and where they will take us are unknown. Most of us don't like unknowns. And most of us are afraid of the unconscious. We never know what it will toss into the light of consciousness. This fear is valid, for whatever comes into consciousness makes a claim on us. Once our eyes are open to something, we can't go back without heavy consequences. This is imaged in the Garden of Eden story by angels with flaming swords being stationed at each entrance to the garden as Adam and Eve make their exit. The message was clear. There is no going back. We have to find a way to live with the situation that evolves out of our expanded awareness. People wake up to different things. The claims that our new consciousness makes on us depends on what we wake up to. Eve made contact with her instinctual wisdom. Adam woke up to the essence of the feminine principle. What they did out of their awakened senses educates us about two types of energy that are always at work in our unconscious life: the masculine principle and the feminine principle, or to put it another way, spirit and soul. As we will see, spirit brings meaning. Soul gets us involved in life, thereby giving us experiences. When new awareness comes, it needs our participation in order to complete its work, which is to expand our personality, to round it out, to add texture to it, to deepen it and widen it. Adam and Eve's responses to their awakenings tell us something about how we can cooperate with the eye-opening moments that visit us, how we can live out of both soul and spirit. When Adam perceived the deeper meaning of his human companion, the first name that he had given her seemed unsuitable. It was the name of a kind of human. Like zebra or elephant is a kind of animal. It was not an individual or personal name. It was a name that identified her as part of him, woman made of man, rather than a name that acknowledged who she was, the mother of all living things. Perhaps he caught on to Eve's fundamental makeup when he heard the presence describe the suffering involved in birth. Maybe he recognized the link between her picking the apple and the terrifying and exciting things that followed. It doesn't really matter what activated his consciousness. What matters is that he responded out of it. He acted on it. He allowed it to change him. And that change was manifested in his attitude and behavior toward the feminine aspect of life. The Adam side of expanded consciousness asks us to grasp the meaning of what just happened to us. We may not be able to articulate the meaning, but we will sense a release from something and a beckoning towards something else. When this happens, we are beholden to anchor the encounter in some way. Adam did this when he bestowed on his human companion a name filled with meaning and reverence and gratitude. Recognizing her as separate from himself, he could now choose to enter into partnership with her. Before that, they were simply one with each other. After the bite of the apple, they became accomplices in crime. After the naming, they became mates, partners, a team. She registered the stirring of instinct and acted on it. She picked and tasted the apple. With that bite, another instinctual urge occurred. It suggested that she offer a taste to Adam. In biting the apple, Eve became aware of her inner voice, rather than just the outer voice of the presence. And out of that awareness, she offered the experience of awakening to Adam. Her connection to instinct was part of what Adam later recognized in her as life-giving. For instinct is in service to survival, to life. Eve's instinctual responses also point us towards soul's demand on us when she wakes up within us. And that demand is to belong to life. Life is Eve's realm. She rules the domain of earthly life. Anyone who desires to feel at home in this earthly life must become comfortable with her, with soul. Eve, or soul, asks us to belong to something in the world. That something may be a mate, it may be a work, a place we have chosen to live, a spiritual path. It may choose us, we may choose it. However the choosing comes about, the next step is to belong to it. I don't mean belonging to someone as their property, handing over our personal authority, pouring our energy into the fulfillment of their lives. I mean, rather, making that person or thing a part of our life. It means choosing something outside ourselves and then loyally serving that chosen something, while also allowing it to affect us deeply, even transform us. You see, being in right relationship with Eve means having a heart that has learned to love. Such a heart stops long enough and looks closely enough to see beyond appearances. Where is the beauty behind what looks deranged or ugly or undesirable in our mate, in our work? Such a heart reflects deeply on the meaning of what we encounter, choosing over and over again to digest whatever life brings to us and find nourishment in it. Belonging to a person or a work or a certain path calls us into activity, into creativity, and often answers our search for meaning. Like Eve, we invite others into deeper and wider consciousness as we step into life and allow ourselves to belong to it. In waking up, Eve, or soul, freed humanity to experience life. In perceiving soul, Adam, or spirit, bestowed meaning on human experience. These two gifts enable us to take hold of life, to sort it out, and conduct it in a new way. As the couple left the Garden of Eden, Adam put his arm around Soul, and Eve leaned into Spirit's side, where a rib was missing. Light from the flaming sword cast their shadows before them, as instruction to leave the past behind them, but never forget it, because the past must inform the present. And the serpent went before them, emitting a green glow, which led them into imaginations of what might be, of what could be, of what needs to be. Over time, soul birthed mythologies and culture, and spirit brought forth ritual and traditions to honor soul. With the vibrant light of imagination snaking a path at their feet, Adam and Eve found the creative power of their humanness. We are their sons and daughters, endowed with experience and meaning, embodying the ability to know joy and understanding. It is true, you see, that the apple does not fall far from the tree. Thank you. I also want to thank my family for the bouquet. It's beautiful, it's cool, I like it. It's just awesome to have it here. Made for the occasion. My husband and one of my sons is here, and I'm grateful to have them here as well. Okay, so the pictures I'm going to show you were drawn by, were painted by an analysand. And I'm going to use the name Anne for her. And Anne has given me permission to use her material this evening. Anne was married at the time that I saw her. She was married with 2 preschool children. She had been unhappy in her marriage for quite some time. And she and her husband had talked earnestly about the issues that bothered her, and they had gone to couples counseling for a few sessions. Her question was, do I leave or do I stay? And after struggling with these questions for months, she finally set up an appointment to see a divorce lawyer with the intention of gathering information about her rights. Well, the night before this appointment, she had a dream in which she went to the lawyer's office. A receptionist dressed in a black and white checked dress sat behind the desk. The only thing on the desk was a red rose in a vase. Her associations to the dream included a memory of an incident shortly before her husband proposed to her. She had had a devastating performance review at work, and that evening she was emceeing the kickoff of a convention for her professional body. And she really didn't feel up to it. Her self-confidence was very shaken. Well, her boyfriend offered to drive her to the event, and when he arrived at the door to pick her up, he had a single rose in his hand, which he gave her. She said that she clutched that rose all the way to the convention center, and then she tucked it into a hidden shelf on the podium so that it would be near her as she spoke and did her task. Furthermore, the dress that the receptionist was wearing in the dream reminded Anne of the dress that she wore that night to the convention. The image of the rose had a powerful effect on her, and it stayed with her as she kept her appointment with the lawyer. It stayed with her as she cooked dinner. It stayed with her as she crawled into bed. It stayed with her the following days. And finally, one afternoon, while her children napped, she just decided that she was going to paint and see if she could capture the essence of the rose. So she got out her kids' finger paints and a brush, and she painted the first picture. And over the next month, she painted 7 images, trying to express her fascination with the rose. And that's what I'm going to be showing you tonight. And I'm going to go through, as I talk about these pictures, I'm going to use the alchemical equation that I talked about tonight. Awesome. Thank you. Round of applause. There were all kinds of little pictures and glitches here. Okay, this first picture that she painted. Then comes the one. So that's the first piece in the equation. In this picture, there's a chaotic, diffuse quality to the picture, and Anne said that the black spots represent the black and white check dress in the dream. And of course, we know that black is often associated with the unconscious and white with consciousness. The individual spots, just the scatteredness and the fact that there's spots rather than a solid black, indicates that consciousness around something is breaking up. Now the image of the rose is unclear. The bud looks like it's struggling to open. It might succeed, it might not. The green of the stem and the leaves is tinged with black. And again, the symbol looks like something coming out of the unconscious and trying to break into consciousness. In Anne's feeling life, a niggle that something isn't as it should be had been going on for quite some time. And I think this is a picture that it just pictures that first stage, that there's more to her discontent than meets the eye. Thank you. Perhaps unconsciousness surrounding some aspect of her attitude is trying to break into awareness. Okay, the next picture, Craig. This is 1 becomes 2. So here, the rose is coming more to the foreground. That first rose, there's only 4 black spots, and they are ordered. And that rose is seen from the same angle as the first rose, the rose in the first picture. But this rose is more defined, and it looks like it is going to open. The colors of the stem and the leaves is unpolluted. This speaks of an increase in clarity, and with the 4 dots, that hints at the possibility of wholeness. The picture beside it is a rose seen from above, and the flower has a tentative or blurry aspect to it. Here, it would seem to me that Anne is beginning to look at her situation from a different perspective. She's perhaps rising above the situation and looking at the bigger picture. The question, do I leave or do I stay, may be softening a bit. Anne is becoming aware that the situation is not that black and white. So here in the picture to the right, there's 5 black dots, and 5 usually signals, the number 5 usually signals the start of another lap. Either another lap of starting the process over or starting another lap around the issue. Okay, Craig, next picture. The 2 becomes 3. So here we see a clarifying and separation, further clarifying and separation of the 2 viewpoints. In the picture to the left, the view from above is more clear, the rose is more defined. It's also contained within a square. The leaf in each corner signals the potential for coming to wholeness or completion within her psyche. All of this together, looking at the rose from above and also the strength of the lines and colors, indicates that Anne has gained some distance from her dilemma, and she's able to contain emotional difficulties without acting on them or suppressing them. She's able to reflect on the situation and perhaps is gaining some conceptual understanding of it. And then over on the right, we've got a rose in a vase. This rose has opened into maturity. It is seen at eye level, which is a closer view, it's a more intimate view. The rose is accessible, and the black vase supports it so that it stands up. Now in the middle, we have a picture of two wilting roses. So Anne is coming to awareness of the ways in which she has contributed to the unhappiness in her marriage. She's starting to confront some shadow aspects of herself. This is not easy, it's not pleasant, and it leads to suffering. Anne is suffering, and this suffering has been brought on by seeing the negative influence that her patterns and attitudes are having on herself, on her husband, on her children, on her marriage. Her blaming stance toward her husband begins to wilt. The red petals turned into teardrops in the painting are an image of her suffering. Holding the tension between leaving and staying has brought Anne to this place where her eyes are opening to her own self. Her consciousness is increasing. She's getting to know herself more intimately. Next picture, please, Craig. Out of the three comes the one as the fourth. And here we have an image of the aha moment. The single rose has become a rose bush. Leaves and roses abound. Black depression and suffering, which Anne has been experiencing, has transformed into rich black soil out of which the bush grows. This painting exudes the energy of life. Anne's question, am I going to stay, should I stay or should I leave, is changing. And it's becoming more the question of, is it possible for me to continue to grow within the context of this marriage? It's a very different question. This is the new one. This is the new paradise. Life moves forward. Now, Anne's issue is not over and done with. Never seems to be in our lives. So this is the end of a series of paintings that happened within a month. But I must show you one more that was painted months later. The round begins again. This is the beginning of another round. She did this with oil pastels. And in the background, we've got the unconscious as a big, solid presence. Just black. The bush from the last painting has now grown and reproduced. Roses are separating out in color. Now we've got red roses and white roses. There are two trunks. The bush has become two trees, and they are so large that they are bursting off the paper. Anne's self-awareness has grown so much that she needs to find a bigger container for her blossoming personality. So we're left with the question, can the marriage flex enough for her to develop more of her potential, to utilize more of her personality? That's it. Thank you.